Harper. Senator Hawley, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Great to see each of you. Professor O'Connell, if I could just begin with you. I know that this is your field, and I'm interested in getting your perspective on some of this, particularly some of your historical perspective. Let me just begin, though, with something that you mentioned, I think, in your testimony, and that is that in some sense, the problem of vacancies begins with the executive branch. President Trump, for instance, if I've got my numbers right, he didn't nominate a single individual for 36% of posts. I mean, that's a lot. That's a big number. President Obama, similarly, did not nominate a single individual for over 25% of posts during a similar time frame. That's also a pretty big number. What do you think we should infer from that?
I think you could, Senator, thank you for that question. I think you could infer several things. First, that there are a lot of positions to fill, and some positions take priority and others do not. And so sort of in the fixed resources, fixed time, some positions just don't take a high priority. Second, I think you can take that there's not a lot of pressure to fill those positions, right? So as you indicate, Senator, and I'm quoting here from research by David Lewis and Mark Richardson out of Vanderbilt University, 30% of positions on average don't receive a single nominee in the first 2 years, looking at the past 3 completed administrations. And I think a large part of that is the Federal Vacancies Reform Act of 1998. So at least for a set of positions where you can have acting officials, the need for a Senate confirmed person in that position, just is not as great, because you can have an acting official carrying out all the duties, exclusive and non-exclusive, to that Senate confirmed job. And then when the time limits run out, and they are very generous time limits, what happens in these agencies is you have delegations of authority downward for the non-exclusive functions. And basically, most of the functions are non-exclusive in federal agencies. And then you have delegations. So you have at the Department of Homeland Security across Democratic and Republican administrations. You go to that leadership page and you look right now at the undersecretaries. The majority of them are not Senate confirmed officials, and you have senior officials performing the duties. And under these delegations, there are no time limits under the Vacancies Act. And so you can have those positions carried out for years, for entire presidential terms, without ever putting forward a nominee.
That's very interesting. Do you think is one of the takeaways here that maybe the federal administrative apparatus has become so gargantuan that even the person who has some directive authority of it, speaking of the president, but it's only some directive authority, but even that person doesn't seem to have an enormous incentive to fill. Even he or she does not necessarily see the need to fill the entire apparatus of an administrative branch that they don't control it, of course, but they largely direct, or could. And yet they think that they can administer the government without, in President Obama's case, a quarter of positions. In President Trump's case, 36%. I mean, what's your view on that? I mean, is part of the issue that the size and scope is just so gigantic that it's hard for even the president, who has a decided interest in this, it would be in their interest, but it's hard for even the president to find a pressing need to fill these positions, some of them.
So, as the economy has changed, we have a large administrative state. I think I'm more a fan of the administrative state than you may be, Senator. But what's interesting is that from the 1960s, federal employment has been relatively constant. So it's not as if the federal government has expanded in size. Now, what has happened, research by Professor Paul Light, known as thickening of government. And so you have more of these management type of positions. We see this, I'm an academic, we see this in universities too, where you have a thickening of the management positions. And it's not clear that all of those management positions are needed. And in fact, to have greater presidential control, if you had fewer of those positions, like if the kind of line of accountability was clearer, might actually be more helpful in terms of the president's interests and constitutional role in managing federal agencies.
So that's interesting. Let me just ask you, and I'm probably going to date myself with this next remark, show you that I haven't, show you when I was in law school. But when I was in law school, Stephen Skoranek was someone in his work on the administrative state and as it related to the political branches and political energy. You know, he talked about the waning of political time in America because of, I think, the phenomenon of thickening that you just said. I mean, part of his, if I remember, and you can correct me if you know Skoranek, and apologies to him if I'm terribly misrepresenting his work. But my memory of it is that part of Skoranek's point is that as the administrative apparatus has become thicker, deeper, bigger. I mean, pick your adjective of choice. It has become more difficult for somewhat perhaps paradoxically, more difficult for presidents to enact their agendas. Of course, it's also more difficult for Congress to control these agencies. Do you agree with that analysis as I've stated it in rough outline, or do you think that's off in some fundamental way?
I think it has to be acknowledged that federal agencies are doing more complex work. When I was referring to thickening, I was referring to a different sort of thickening. I was referring to the thickening of leadership positions,
Right.
like the growth, for example, of assistant secretary positions.
Yep.
So we have that. Now, does that impact presidential control? That's less clear. I mean, I think what we've seen in recent administrations on the left and on the right is the rise of what now Justice Kagan labels a presidential administration. And we have that through increasing presidential directives, whether they're executive orders or presidential memoranda directing federal agencies to take various actions. And I think that is a counterweight and does allow presidential control. Of course, that raises certain concerns, both on the left and the right, about the president's role in terms of directing federal agencies. When we think about, of course, Congress's role in terms of what it delegates and what it wants from federal agencies.
Yeah, fair enough. My time is I was going to say it's just about expired. Technically, it has. But one more question, and I'll stop. I will ask this question, and I will cease and desist, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to ask Mr. White, Dr. White, to be able to weigh in on this, just in terms of the administrative state. I mean, my own view is, I was previewing with Professor O'Connell, as part of what's happened here is that the administrative state has become so powerful, in the sense that this body, the Congress, delegates so much to the administrative state that. And there are now so many political positions to fill that even presidents don't find there being a great incentive to fill them all. I mean, just give us your perspective on this and what you think reforms might be. I mean, how might we go about thinning this out in a way that is constitutionally responsible?
Well, I agree completely with the point. And in my written testimony and in my statements earlier, I tried to return time and time again to the basic problem of delegation, the problem of overbroad delegation exacerbating the issues we're discussing. And your point about slower and slower execution is right on point. In our system, Congress ought to take its time legislating, and then once it's made a decision, it should make a decision that the president and his administration can quickly and clearly execute. That's the energy in execution. Today, unfortunately, with so much power and discretion delegated to the administration, you have the worst of both worlds. It takes forever for an administration to formulate the policy and then go into execution. So we often think of delegation as empowering a president. It does in a way, but in terms of actual execution, it really deforms execution and slows it down. So anything that can be done to reduce the breadth of discretion and powers delegated to the agency will make execution faster. It will take the temperature down on Senate confirmation fights and will alleviate a number of other sort of secondary symptoms of the delegation problem that we're grappling with here today and in other issues before the committee.
Thank you.